say that you've created quite a few rules over time. You've accumulated some business logic here that may or may not be very regular. If you have lots of exceptions, then it makes sense to look at them as individual textual rules. But if, like in this rule set, you have a number of rules that are following the same pattern, they are checking just a limited number of attributes or always the same set of attributes. So they have very similar types of conditions, and they all lead to the same type of action. So here, all of my conditions are based on the average age and total mileage and/or total mileage, and the action is always about risk level. Then instead of looking at those business rules and editing them in that context, I may want to turn this rule set into a decision table instead. So I would be able to look at the rules, exactly the same set of rules, but this time in a representation that's better formatted. So here I can see that the applicants that are between 16 and 25 are high risk, and I can compare that. And as you can notice here on the side, I still have my heat map information so that I know how many documents in my current data set, which is right here, my Census 2000, where I have 100 applications. I can see how many of them are going through each one of those rows or applicable to each one of those business rules. And for Joe, the current document, this is the one that applies. So I do have a lot of contextual information here, but I may want to reorganize the table so that we can sort them based on mileage. And I can make a difference between those people that drive a lot. Here people, well, it's not necessarily a lot, but people that drive more than 5,000 miles per year all end up into this medium risk category. And they are pretty much middle-aged applicants. Those other applicants that do not drive a lot, less than 5,000, end up into the low risk or the standard risk, and I can validate here that the order makes sense. And for the younger people, anyone that's less than 45, it doesn't matter how much they drive, they all end up into the high risk or standard risk category, depending on their age. So it might be a good representation to not only understand how the data how the rules are structured and how they relate to each other, but it's also a good way to go ahead and edit. So for example, if I wanted to add a column, add a row, or here in that case, if I wanted to change the limit so that it's not 25 but it will be 22 now, I can do that directly into the decision table very efficiently. So I don't have to go back to the source rule and so I could edit any of those representation. But if I wanted to add a column, one column is okay, but if the column only applies to one of the rows, then I end up with a lot of white space into this rule set. And you can see there are only 6 rules in here, and I already have quite a fair amount of white space. So for those types of rule sets, it might make sense to look at a tree. And it might be because of the type of rule set or because of the action that I'm performing right now. So let me hide all of that because the tree is going to take more space. And here I can see I have this category of those people that drive less than 5,000, more than 5,000, and then the younger people for whom it doesn't really matter how much they ride. And here again, I do have my usage information, so I can see here based on the gauge and the number how many applications are going into each category. So there are 35 applicants that drive less than 5,000. Out of those, only 21 are between 55 and 75, and those end up into the high risk category. And my green ball shows me where Joe which rule applies to Joe specifically. Here what I can notice very quickly is that nobody drives more than 5,000 into this age category, into this age group. So I have quite a bit of information available in this representation, and again I can go into edit mode and I can add nodes into the decision tree. What I notice here is that we have 21 people ending up into this standard risk category. But I can see that here we have another 31. So instead of trying to look at each end node into the decision tree, I may want to go ahead and just look at all the different paths that could lead to this decision, to the standard risk. And in order to do that, I could go back to the table and use the pivot table to sort by action. But if I like the graphical aspect and I know that my rules are not very regular, I may want to turn it into a graph, turn the entire rule set into a graph. And I could just focus on my standard risk, which is the one that I was looking at. And indeed, with people that drive less than 5,000 and the not so young people, or young and young plus kind of crowd, will go into standard risk. But here let's go back to look at the entire decision graph. And again, I do have all of the rules reorganized so that I can see the different paths. I can focus on any of them. The interesting part here is that you can also use the visual representation to detect some odd patterns. So instead of reading or looking at really the details into the table, here you can notice that there is this kind of a loop or cycle. I start with the same decisioning, greater than 5,000 miles. But then I have two different ways based on average age to get to medium risk. So there might be some ways to improve the logic, simplify the logic so that we don't have to. And maybe it makes sense because they are the very young and very old. In that case, we do have two age groups that connect. It's from 45 to 55 and 55 to 75. So here there is an opportunity to optimize this rule and just create one out of the system. And yet again, I will be able to make edits. So it doesn't really matter what's the representation that you initially created your rules with. You may have started with a decision table and then ended up having so many exceptions that it's totally white and it has lots of empty cells, and then you want to turn it into something different. I think it really depends on what you want to do. If I'm the compliance person and I want to see what are all the different ways I will go end up with a high risk rating or a decline decision, then I will want to look at a graph for sure, and possibly the decision table with the pivot table option activated. But if I'm crafting, I'm focusing on those population and I'm really interested in how they what's the behavior, what's the way I want to organize them, then I may want to do it as a tree instead, and represent and do the exploration and the crafting of the decision logic in that representation. While one of my partners in the team may want to look at the decision table because it's very compact and very convenient way to see the same information. So here there are many different ways, and of course some people may want to just focus on the rules one at a time. And the reason I may want to do that is because I don't care about the entire logic. I don't care about every single rule into this rule set. I only care about the rules that apply to the current document. I only care about the rules that apply to Joe. So in that case, just reading the if then else and not having a bushy tree or lots of rows in the table will make more sense for me, and that will be much more convenient. So this is what we call the fluid metaphor. It's the way I can navigate and not only see the rules in all those different representation, but really see the interact with the rules in the representation that makes sense for me, what somebody else might be interacting in the different representation. So the representation is, just eye candy, if you will. And you want more than looking at the candies in a candy store through the window. You really want to be able to touch them and eat them, I suppose. So this is what we call fluid metaphor, and that's part of our visual logic. Thank you.